Christmas Eve snow fell thick and heavy on a small street in Boston, coating the sidewalks in white silence. Yellow light from Peterson's bakery spilled onto the concrete where a woman clutched two shivering children, twins no older than 5. Their small bodies pressed against her legs as if trying to absorb whatever warmth she could provide. Emma Collins, 34 years old with tired eyes that had once sparkled with purpose, whispered to her children as they waited outside the bakery's closing door. Her nurse's training had taught her how to remain calm in emergencies, but nothing had prepared her for this. Homeless on Christmas Eve, with Lucas and Lily depending on her for survival. Through the bakery window, Mr. Peterson shook his head firmly, pointing to the closed sign he'd just hung. His face showed a practiced blend of sympathy and dismissal, the look of someone who'd built a wall between himself and others suffering. Emma's shoulders slumped, but she maintained her dignity, chin still raised despite the rejection. The twins didn't cry. They'd learned over the past weeks that tears changed nothing. A man approached from down the street, his worn work jacket dusted with snow, carrying a small gift bag. Thomas Reed, 38 years old, walked with the steady gait of someone accustomed to carrying heavy tools and heavier responsibilities. A plumber by trade, he'd just finished an emergency call at the Harrington building downtown. The extra holiday pay would help with Lily's Christmas gift, an art set she'd been eyeing for months. His 8-year-old daughter was staying with Mrs. Patel from next door for a few hours, allowing Thomas to complete this last job before the holiday. Thomas slowed as he neared the bakery, noticing the woman and children. Something about their posture, dignity wrapped in desperation, made him stop. The woman was speaking softly to the bakery owner through the glass. "Please, just some day-old bread for the children. Anything you were going to throw away." Her voice carried the particular strain of someone trying to maintain composure while their world collapsed. Thomas approached the bakery door and knocked firmly. Mr. Peterson reluctantly unlocked it, cracking it just enough to speak. Cold air rushed into the warm shop, carrying the scent of fresh bread that made the twins look up with hungry eyes. Thomas pointed to the racks of unsold bread visible behind the counter. "How much for whatever you have left?" The baker sighed, glancing at his watch. "It's all going to waste anyway. $40, and you can take the lot." Thomas pulled out his wallet, removing the money he'd just earned from the emergency call, and handed it over without hesitation. "Then I'll take it all." He turned to the woman and children with a careful smile, not wanting to seem threatening. "Can you help me carry this? There's too much for one person." The woman looked up, confusion and wariness in her exhausted features. As the light from the bakery illuminated her face, Thomas's breath caught in his throat. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by disbelief. The last time he'd seen this face, it had been framed by the stark white collar of a nurse's uniform in Boston Memorial Hospital's pediatric wing. Claire? Emma Collins? The name emerged as a question, though Thomas was certain. He'd never forget the nurse who had stayed with his daughter Lily for 8 straight hours after her accident, the woman who had refused to leave even after her shift ended. Emma stared back, recognition gradually replacing confusion, followed immediately by shame. She instinctively pulled the twins closer, as if trying to shield them from his gaze. "Thomas Reed?" A flush spread across her cheeks, visible even in the dim light. "Oh God, I'm sorry. You shouldn't see me like this." She tried to turn away, but Lucas tugged at her sleeve, his small voice piercing the awkward silence. "Mommy, is he the nice man?" Emma's composure cracked momentarily, tears welling in her eyes before she blinked them away. "Yes, baby, he is." Thomas took in the scene properly now. Emma's jacket torn at the shoulder, her hands purple from cold. Both twins dressed in summer clothes completely inadequate for winter, their shoes worn through at the toes. He recognized the look of people who had been outdoors far too long, who hadn't had a proper meal in days. He'd seen it in the mirror 4 years ago after Sarah died, before he'd pulled himself together for Lily's sake. "How long have you been out here?" Thomas kept his voice gentle, careful not to sound judgmental. Emma wouldn't meet his eyes, her gaze fixed on a point beyond his shoulder. "Just tonight. We're fine, really. Just a temporary situation." The lie was transparent. Thomas could see the deep exhaustion etched into her face, the way her body swayed slightly with fatigue, the hollowness in the twins' eyes that spoke of hunger beyond just missing a meal. "Tonight is Christmas Eve," Thomas said, his voice firm but kind. Nobody should be outside in this weather, especially children. He nodded toward his truck parked across the street, the faded lettering on the door reading, "Reed Plumbing. We fix what's broken." "Please let me help. My truck is right there. We can get this bread somewhere warm." Emma shook her head, pride still intact despite everything. "I can't ask you to do that. You've already done enough." Thomas met her eyes directly. "You're not asking. I'm offering." He paused, the memory of his daughter's hospital room vivid in his mind. "And after what you did for Lily last year, after you saved my daughter and refused to leave her side, this isn't even close to repaying that debt." Thomas walked to his truck and opened the passenger door, then looked back at Emma, who stood frozen in indecision. The twins stared up at their mother, their expressions a mixture of hope and resignation, too young to fully understand but old enough to know they needed help. "Please," Thomas said quietly, "it's Christmas Eve. Let someone help you the way you've helped others." The little girl, Lily, Thomas remembered Emma calling her, started crying quietly, the sound barely audible but enough to break her mother's resistance. Emma nodded once, the movement barely perceptible, and Thomas gently picked up both children, one in each arm, carrying them to his truck. They weighed so little it frightened him. Emma followed behind, clutching the bag of bread, tears freezing on her cheeks as Thomas started the engine and turned the heater to maximum. As they drove through the snowy streets, Lucas whispered from the back seat, his voice small but clear. "Are you an angel?" Thomas caught the boy's eye in the rearview mirror and smiled gently. "No, sweetheart, just someone who remembers what it's like to need help." Thomas's apartment was on the second floor of a converted triple-decker in Dorchester, a modest two-bedroom place that was clean and warm, but clearly showed the signs of tight finances and a single parent doing his best. Children's drawings were taped to the refrigerator. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner decorated with homemade ornaments, and a stack of plumbing textbooks served as an end table. It wasn't much, but it was home. As Thomas unlocked the door, 8-year-old Lily came running from Mrs. Patel's apartment across the hall, her face lighting up with excitement. "Daddy, you're home! Did you fix the big pipe?" She stopped abruptly, noticing Emma and the twins, curiosity replacing her enthusiasm. "Who are they?" Thomas set the twins down gently on the worn carpet. "Santa sent them to visit us tonight." He winked at his daughter, knowing she was old enough to understand the Santa story wasn't real, but still young enough to appreciate the magic of it. "This is Miss Emma and her children Lucas and Lily." He smiled at the coincidence of the names. "They're going to stay with us for a little while." Lily, wise beyond her 8 years from growing up without a mother, seemed to understand on some level that these people needed help. She studied them for a moment, then ran to her room, returning with an armful of blankets and her favorite stuffed animals. "Here, you can share these. They help when you're sad." Little Lily hesitantly accepted the stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with wonder. Emma turned away, using the pretext of examining the apartment to hide fresh tears. Thomas guided everyone to the small living room, helping the twins out of their wet coats and shoes, while Emma stood awkwardly by the door, as if afraid to fully enter this space, this normalcy that had been so recently torn from her own life. Thomas moved to the kitchen, separated from the living room only by a counter. "I made soup earlier, nothing fancy, but it's hot." He opened the fridge, pulling out a large pot. "And now we have fresh bread to go with it." He gestured to the bag of bakery goods Emma still clutched in her hands. The twins sat at the small kitchen table, their legs dangling from the chairs, watching Thomas heat the soup with expressions of barely contained hunger. Thomas's daughter immediately took charge of entertaining them, showing them her drawings and asking their names again, creating a momentary bubble of childhood normalcy. Emma finally stepped fully into the apartment, placing the bread on the counter. "I can help," she offered, her voice smaller than it had been at the hospital where Thomas had first met her. There, she'd been confident and authoritative, a professional in her element. Now she seemed diminished, uncertain in this unfamiliar domestic terrain. "Just sit," Thomas insisted gently. "Rest. When was the last time you had a proper meal?" Emma didn't answer, which was answer enough. Thomas ladled soup into bowls, sliced the fresh bread from the bakery, and watched as Emma and her children ate with a careful restraint that belied their hunger. They took small, measured bites, as if afraid the food might disappear if they showed too much enthusiasm. Thomas recognized the behavior. People who'd been hungry long enough to develop rituals around eating, making each bite last. They were halfway through the meal when the lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the apartment into darkness. Thomas cursed under his breath. He'd been meaning to pay the electric bill, but had prioritized buying Lily's Christmas present instead. He found a small candle in a kitchen drawer, lit it with a match, and placed it on the table. The tiny flame cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an unexpected intimacy. "I'm sorry," he said, embarrassment coloring his voice. "The electricity will be back on after the holiday when I can pay the bill." Emma looked at the small candle, then at Thomas, really looked at him for the first time since arriving. Her gaze took in his worn sweater, the patched elbows of his shirt, the careful way he prepared a meal that was simple but nourishing. She saw a man who had almost nothing himself but was sharing what little he had without hesitation or expectation. "You're behind on your bills, and you still helped us?" Her voice held no judgment, only a soft wonder. Thomas shrugged, a small movement in the candlelight. A small light is still enough to share. That's what matters. The words were his father's, spoken decades ago during another Christmas power outage, when Thomas was not much older than the twins. Lily, practical as always, went to her room and returned with her battery-operated nightlight shaped like a moon. "See, we have lots of light." She placed it in the center of the table, its gentle glow supplementing the candle. The twins seemed mesmerized by it, their soup momentarily forgotten. After dinner, Thomas made hot chocolate for the children, while Emma began to explain what had happened, her voice barely above a whisper so the little ones wouldn't hear all the details. The children had moved to the living room floor where Lily was showing them how to make paper snowflakes from old newspapers. "The hospital I worked at, Boston Memorial, closed down 6 months ago. They declared bankruptcy and left all of us without final paychecks." Emma cradled the mug of tea Thomas had made her hand still showing a slight tremor. "I had some savings, but it went fast with rent and food for the twins. I tried to find another nursing job, but the market is saturated, and without a reference from my last employer, because they don't exist anymore, nobody would hire me." Thomas listened without interrupting, recognizing the particular hell of being qualified and willing to work but unable to find employment. After Sarah died, he'd struggled to keep his plumbing business afloat while caring for a 4-year-old alone. "We lost our apartment 3 weeks ago." Emma's voice had dropped even lower. "We've been staying at the Pine Street shelter, but they're full for the holidays, so tonight—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Thomas felt anger rising in his chest, not at Emma, but at a system that could let someone like her, someone who dedicated her life to helping others, fall through the cracks so completely. "What about family, friends?" Emma shook her head, her hands tightening around the mug. "My parents died when I was in nursing school. I have no siblings, and most of my friends couldn't help even if they wanted to. Medical professionals don't make as much as people think, and everyone I know is barely getting by themselves." She glanced toward the living room, where the twins, warm and fed for the first time in who knows how long, were beginning to nod off despite their excitement over Lily's games. "You can take my room," Thomas said decisively. "Lily can sleep with me in her room. It's just for tonight, or however long you need." Emma started to protest, but Thomas raised a hand to stop her. "Please, it's already late, and it's snowing harder. Just get some rest. We'll figure everything else out tomorrow." Reluctantly, Emma agreed, too exhausted to argue further. Thomas helped her settle the twins in his room, the two small bodies curling together in the center of his queen-size bed like puppies seeking warmth. Lily loaned them her second favorite pajamas, which swam on their smaller frames but were clean and soft. As Emma tucked them in, Lucas looked up at Thomas standing in the doorway. "Is this our home now?" The question held no expectation, just innocent curiosity. Before Thomas could formulate an answer, Emma smoothed her son's hair back from his forehead. "This is Mr. Thomas's home. He's being very kind to let us stay tonight." "But it's warm," Lily, the twin, murmured sleepily. "And there's food." Emma kissed her daughter's forehead, her voice steady despite the pain Thomas could see in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, there is. Now sleep." The twins drifted off almost immediately, the combination of warmth, food, and safety overwhelming after weeks of uncertainty. Thomas's daughter had already fallen asleep on the couch while waiting for her bed, her small body curled around a book of Christmas stories. Thomas carried her to her room, tucking her in with practiced ease. When he returned to the living room, Emma was standing by the window, watching the snow fall. In the combined glow of the candle and nightlight, her profile reminded Thomas of Renaissance paintings of Madonnas, strength and vulnerability perfectly balanced, a mother carrying the weight of her children's future. The comparison surprised him. He hadn't thought in those terms since Sarah was alive. She'd been the artistic one, always seeing beauty in unexpected places. "Thank you," Emma said without turning from the window. "Not just for the food and shelter, but for not asking too many questions, for not making me feel worse than I already do." Thomas moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I know something about pride. After Sarah, my wife, died, I was too proud to ask for help. Nearly lost the apartment, nearly lost my business. It was Mrs. Patel across the hall who finally knocked some sense into me." He smiled faintly at the memory. "She showed up with groceries one day and told me that accepting help isn't weakness. It's how communities survive." Emma finally turned to look at him. "Your wife, I'm sorry. Was it recent?" "4 years ago, cancer." Thomas kept his voice neutral through long practice. "Lily was 4. Some days it feels like yesterday. Some days it feels like another lifetime." Emma nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The twins' father left when I told him I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready for one child, let alone two." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "I thought I could do it all. Work, raise the kids, build a life. And I did, for 5 years, until the hospital closed." They stood in silence for a moment, two single parents who had faced different paths to the same precipice, the terrifying knowledge that they alone stood between their children and disaster. "You should get some rest too," Thomas finally said. "The couch pulls out. I'll get you some blankets." Later, after Emma had settled on the pull-out sofa and Thomas had checked that all 3 children were still sleeping soundly, he sat at his small kitchen table with a notepad. By candlelight, he made calculations, moving numbers around like puzzle pieces that refused to fit. The electricity bill, Lily's school fees, the truck's insurance coming due, and now 3 more mouths to feed, at least temporarily. It wasn't going to work, not without sacrifices. Thomas glanced at the small Christmas gift bag he'd brought home. Inside was an art set for Lily, not the expensive one she'd wanted, but a decent alternative he'd found on sale. Now, looking at the receipt, he saw another possibility. If he returned it tomorrow, combined with what was left in his checking account. Decision made, Thomas wrote a note and placed it on the kitchen counter, along with most of the money he had left. Not a gift, just an advance on faith that better days are coming. He left his phone number at the bottom, then quietly gathered his tools for an early start. The building superintendent at the Harrington Tower had mentioned other repairs needed, and Thomas had promised to return the day after Christmas. Now he'd go on Christmas Day itself, when the overtime pay would be triple. He paused at the door of his bedroom, looking in at the twins asleep in his bed. In the faint glow of the nightlight Lily had insisted they keep, he could see their faces relaxed in sleep, the worry temporarily erased from their features. Something tugged at his heart, a feeling he hadn't experienced since Lily was their age, a protective instinct that went beyond simple compassion. Before leaving the apartment at 5 a.m., Thomas checked the weather. The forecast showed the storm intensifying through the morning, but he had good tires on the truck. He would be careful. He left a second note for Lily, explaining he had an emergency job but would be home for Christmas dinner, along with a small wrapped package, a set of colored pencils he'd been saving for her birthday but could give now as a Christmas morning surprise. The city was eerily quiet, streets empty except for the occasional snowplow. Thomas made it to the Harrington building just as the maintenance supervisor was arriving to check the heating system. The man was surprised but grateful to see Thomas, especially when he explained he could tackle the list of repairs they'd discussed earlier. "On Christmas Day, you're either dedicated or desperate," the supervisor remarked, unlocking the maintenance entrance. Thomas managed a smile. "A bit of both." He didn't elaborate on the 3 extra reasons now sleeping in his apartment. The work was straightforward but time-consuming, fixing leaky valves, replacing worn gaskets, adjusting pressure regulators. Thomas lost himself in the familiar tasks, his hands knowing what to do even as his mind wandered. He thought about Emma's situation, mentally cataloging people he knew who might be hiring, properties where the rent might be affordable for a single mother with twins. He was so absorbed in his work and planning that he barely noticed the hours passing. By the time he finished, it was nearly 3 in the afternoon, and the storm had intensified as predicted. The supervisor handed him a check, adding a holiday bonus that made Thomas blink twice to be sure he was seeing the amount correctly. Mr. Harrington called down specifically, the supervisor explained with a shrug, said anyone working on Christmas Day deserves extra appreciation. You've got a fan upstairs, Reed. Thomas had never met the building's owner, had only heard stories about the wealthy businessman who had transformed this section of downtown. But he was grateful for the man's generosity, which would make a significant difference in the coming weeks. The drive home took twice as long as usual, the truck creeping through snow-covered streets. Thomas's mind raced with possibilities. He could pay the electric bill immediately, buy groceries, maybe even help Emma with a deposit on a new place once she found work. The thought should have felt burdensome, taking on responsibility for another family when he was barely managing his own. Instead, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, purpose beyond a daily survival. When Thomas finally reached his apartment building and trudged up the stairs, snow melting from his boots, he was exhausted but satisfied. He'd accomplished more than he'd hoped. Now he could enjoy what remained of Christmas with Lily and help Emma begin rebuilding her life. He unlocked the door, calling out cheerfully, "Lily, I'm home. Sorry I'm late. The snow is crazy out there." The apartment was silent. Thomas stepped inside, noticing immediately that something was wrong. The pull-out sofa had been neatly made up, the blankets folded at one end. Lily's toys, which had been scattered across the floor during last night's play, were organized in their basket. The kitchen was spotless, cleaner than Thomas had left it. "Lily," he called again, moving quickly to her bedroom. It was empty, the bed made. Fear gripped him until he spotted a note on the pillow in unfamiliar handwriting. "Lily is with Mrs. Patel. She didn't want to wake you when you finally fell asleep this morning. We'll be back with Christmas cookies at 4. Relief flooded Thomas, followed immediately by a new concern. He went to his own bedroom, already knowing what he would find. The bed was perfectly made, the room tidied, all signs of its overnight occupants erased. On the nightstand was a folded piece of paper. His own note from this morning, the one he'd left with the money. Beside it lay the money itself, untouched, and something else. A small silver pin shaped like a medical cross that Thomas recognized as Emma's nursing badge. With a sense of dread, Thomas unfolded the note, finding new writing below his own. "Thomas, you taught me that Christmas isn't about what you have. It's about what you share. You've given us more than shelter. You've given us hope. But I can't keep taking from you when you have so little yourself. We'll find our way. Thank you for reminding me that good people still exist. Please use this money for Lily. Merry Christmas, Emma." Under the badge was written in small letters, "For the man who proved that the best medicine is kindness." Thomas's hand shook as he held the note. He sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the evidence of Emma's departure. She'd left no forwarding address, no phone number, no way for him to find her. His gaze fell on the money, the exact amount he'd left, not a dollar taken despite the obvious need. Pride, he recognized, the same pride that had nearly destroyed him after Sarah died. The front door opened, and Lily's voice filled the apartment. "Daddy, we made Christmas cookies with Mrs. Patel, and she showed me how to make the special tea from India." Thomas quickly composed himself, tucking the note and badge into his pocket before going to meet his daughter. Mrs. Patel stood in the doorway, a knowing look on her lined face. "Your friends left very early," she said without preamble. The woman looked exhausted, poor thing, but she insisted they couldn't stay. "She asked me to look after Lily until you returned." The older woman handed Thomas a plate of cookies. The little ones were sweet children. "The boy has your eyes. Did anyone ever tell you that? Such an unusual green." Thomas didn't correct her assumption about his relationship to the twins. Did Emma say where they were going? Mrs. Patel shook her head. Only that they had an appointment. The children were sad to leave. They'd grown quite attached to Lily in just one night. You know how children are. Yes, Thomas knew. Children form bonds quickly, saw through adult pretenses, recognized kindness, and returned it without complication. He looked down at his daughter, who was carefully arranging cookies on a plate. Daddy, why did Lucas and Lily have to leave before Christmas? She asked, her voice carrying the particular directness of childhood. I was going to share my present with them. Thomas knelt to her level, finding it difficult to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. Sometimes people have to make hard choices, sweetie, but they were very grateful for your kindness. Lily considered this, then nodded with the solemnity of a child accepting an adult's inadequate explanation. Next time they visit, I'll make sure my room is clean so all of us can sleep there. That would be very nice, Thomas agreed, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't express. The rest of Christmas Day passed in a blur of small traditions, opening Lily's few presents, calling Thomas's mother in Florida, watching holiday movies on the tablet since the electricity was still off. Thomas went through the motions, his mind elsewhere, wondering where Emma and the twins were spending Christmas, whether they'd found shelter from the storm, whether they were warm and fed. That night, after Lily was asleep, Thomas sat by the window watching the snow continue to fall. He held Emma's nursing badge, turning it over and over in his hands like a worry stone. Something about her departure felt unfinished, a story with chapters missing. He had helped people before. It was part of his nature, a value his parents had instilled in him. But this felt different. The connection with Emma had been immediate and inexplicable, as if they'd known each other in some previous life. Thomas pulled out his phone, searching for Emma Collins, Nurse Boston, with little expectation of finding anything useful. To his surprise, several results appeared: professional commendations, a mention in a hospital newsletter from 2 years ago praising her work in pediatric emergency care, even a small feature in a local paper about a child she'd helped save during a school bus accident. The most recent entry was the bankruptcy notice for Boston Memorial Hospital, listing creditors and employees affected by the closure. The Emma Collins in these articles was accomplished, respected, essential to her community. The contrast with the woman he'd found begging for bread was stark and heartbreaking, a reminder of how quickly circumstances could change, how tenuous security really was for most people. Thomas had been fortunate after Sarah's death to have his trade, his small business. Emma had lost her entire professional foundation when the hospital closed. 3 days after Christmas, Thomas heard news that made his blood run cold. The local news station reported that a woman and 2 children had gone missing during the post-Christmas snowstorm that had blanketed Boston. They showed a grainy photo provided by the Pine Street shelter, and Thomas immediately recognized Emma and the twins. The report said they'd last been seen downtown, and with temperatures dropping to dangerous levels, authorities were concerned for their safety. Thomas didn't hesitate. He called his supervisor and said he needed emergency time off, then spent the next 12 hours driving through every neighborhood, checking shelters, soup kitchens, churches, and any place he thought Emma might have gone. He showed her photo to dozens of people, most of whom shook their heads apologetically. The storm had intensified again, sidewalks becoming impassable, side streets neglected by the overwhelmed city plows. Thomas's truck slipped and slid through intersections, but he pressed on, a sense of urgency driving him forward. Night was falling, temperatures dropping further, and the image of the twins shivering in summer clothes haunted him. Finally, just as darkness settled over the city, someone at a homeless outreach center mentioned seeing a woman matching Emma's description at a makeshift medical station set up in an abandoned warehouse near the port. The old shipping district had been partially redeveloped, but still contained many vacant buildings, some used unofficially by the homeless when shelters were full. Thomas drove there immediately, parking haphazardly when he spotted activity around a dilapidated warehouse with light spilling from its broken windows. Inside, he found a converted space where volunteers had set up cots, portable heaters, and a basic medical station. The air was thick with the smell of too many bodies in too small a space, underlying notes of mildew and industrial chemicals still lingering from the building's previous life. And there, in a corner surrounded by people who were sick and cold and desperate, was Emma. She wore her old nursing scrubs under a donated coat, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, moving from patient to patient with professional efficiency. Despite her own circumstances, she was doing what she did best, helping others, using her skills even without the structure of a hospital, without pay, without recognition. When she saw Thomas standing in the entrance, Emma's face went pale. She excused herself from the elderly man whose blood pressure she was checking and walked over, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice was low, eyes darting to check that the twins weren't nearby. "You should be home with Lily." Thomas took in the scene around them. The improvised medical station consisting of a folding table covered with donated supplies, the line of people waiting for Emma's attention, the obvious respect in the way the other volunteers deferred to her expertise. His emotions were barely contained, a complex mix of admiration, frustration, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. "You were treating patients." The words came out more accusatory than he'd intended. "You're homeless and hungry, and you're out here treating other people." Emma's chin lifted slightly, a flash of the professional pride he'd glimpsed in the hospital a year ago, momentarily replacing her exhaustion. "I couldn't just take from you and do nothing. These people needed help, and I'm a nurse. It's what I do." Thomas took a step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Where are the twins?" Emma gestured toward a corner where children were gathered around a volunteer reading stories. Lucas and Lily sat among them, coloring with donated crayons, their faces still too thin but more animated than when he'd first seen them outside the bakery. "They're safe, that's what matters." Emma rubbed her arms, whether from cold or discomfort, Thomas couldn't tell. "How did you find us?" "The shelter reported you missing. It's been all over the news." Thomas couldn't keep the worry from his voice. "Emma, it's 20 degrees out there and dropping. This place has barely any heat. You can't stay here." Before Emma could respond, an elderly man approached them, his white beard and stooped posture giving him the appearance of a weathered Santa Claus. He placed a gnarled hand on Emma's shoulder with obvious affection. "Nurse Emma, Jason's fever is rising again. That antibiotic isn't working." His voice carried the refined tones of education, at odds with his ragged appearance. Emma immediately shifted back into professional mode. "I'll be right there, Dr. Frank." She turned to Thomas. "I have to go. These people need me." Dr. Frank, apparently a real doctor despite his current circumstances, studied Thomas with shrewd eyes. "You must be the plumber," she mentioned, "the one who saved them on Christmas Eve." "Thomas Reed." He extended his hand automatically. "Dr. Franklin Winters, formerly of Massachusetts General." The old man's handshake was surprisingly firm. "Before my wife died and the vodka became more appealing than surgery." He delivered this personal tragedy with the clinical detachment of someone who had accepted his fall from grace. "Emma's been a godsend here. We have medical supplies, but lacked someone with her training and compassion." Thomas glanced at Emma, who had already moved back to her patient, her focus complete despite her surroundings. "She shouldn't be here. None of you should." Dr. Frank shrugged. "Many places we shouldn't be in life, yet here we are. But you're right about one thing, this building isn't safe. The city inspector was here yesterday. They're closing it down tomorrow, weather be damned." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through Thomas. "Where will everyone go?" "The lucky ones will crowd into shelters. The rest—" The doctor didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what happened to the homeless during Boston winters. Thomas watched Emma work for another moment, her movements efficient despite her obvious fatigue, her interactions with patients gentle despite her own precarious situation. He'd seen that same dedication when she cared for Lily in the hospital, a complete focus on others' needs and above her own. Making a sudden decision, Thomas approached her again, waiting until she finished bandaging a young woman's injured hand before speaking. "Emma, this place is being shut down tomorrow. You and the twins need somewhere to go." Emma straightened, wincing slightly as if her back ached from bending over patients. "We'll figure something out. We always do." Thomas held her gaze, unwavering. "You incredible, stubborn, amazing woman. You save everyone except yourself." He took a deep breath. "You're coming home with me, and this time you're staying until we figure this out properly." Those twins need their mother healthy, and you can't help anyone if you collapse from exhaustion and cold. Emma started to protest, but Dr. Frank intervened. He's right, Emma. You've been working 16-hour shifts with barely any sleep or food. There are other volunteers who can cover for you. Thomas saw the moment her resistance crumbled, whether from exhaustion, the doctor's words, or the reality of the warehouse's imminent closure. She nodded once, the same barely perceptible movement she'd given outside the bakery on Christmas Eve. Let me finish with this last patient and get the twins. Her voice was soft with defeat, or perhaps just the acknowledgement that sometimes accepting help was the stronger choice. As Emma gathered the twins and her few possessions, Dr. Frank pulled Thomas aside. That woman has saved 3 lives here in just 2 days. Did it with supplies from a first aid kit and sheer determination. He looked at Thomas with unexpected intensity. Don't let her talent go to waste. The world needs more healers like her. Thomas nodded, understanding the responsibility being placed on him. I'll do what I can. The drive back to Thomas's apartment was quiet, the twins falling asleep almost immediately in the warmth of the truck's cabin. Emma sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring out at the snow-covered city, her profile illuminated by passing streetlights. I left you a note, she finally said, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the engine. I explained why we had to go. Thomas kept his eyes on the road, navigating a particularly icy intersection before responding. You said you couldn't keep taking when I had so little, but you never asked what I was willing to give. Emma turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the darkness. Why are you doing this? You barely know us. Thomas considered the question seriously, searching for the truth beneath his actions. It wasn't just gratitude for how she'd cared for Lily, though that was part of it. It wasn't pity. Emma would reject that instantly. It was something more fundamental, a recognition of kinship, of shared values that transcended their brief acquaintance. Because when Sarah died, I learned that sometimes survival depends on strangers becoming family. The words emerged from some deep place Thomas rarely accessed. Because my daughter lights up around your children in a way I haven't seen since her mother died. Because you're the kind of person who uses their last ounce of strength to help others, and that's too rare to lose to a system that doesn't care. Emma was silent for so long that Thomas wondered if she'd fallen asleep. Finally, as they turned onto a street, she spoke so softly he had to strain to hear. I've been taking care of others since I was 17. My sick parents, then my patients, then the twins. I don't know how to be the one who needs help. Thomas parked in front of his building, turning to face her fully. Then maybe it's time you learned, just like I had to. When they reached the apartment, electricity restored thanks to the payment Thomas had made that morning, Lily was beside herself with joy at seeing the twins again. Mrs. Patel, summoned by the commotion, appeared at the door with a casserole she'd prepared just in case, her knowing smile suggesting she'd anticipated this outcome all along. That night, after the children were asleep, all 3 in Lily's room in what they called a floor picnic of blankets and pillows, Thomas and Emma sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea, planning next steps. The badge Emma had left behind sat between them, a reminder of their unusual connection. I made some calls today, Thomas said, pulling out a notepad with scribbled names and numbers. The Harrington Community Health Center is expanding. They're looking for experienced nurses who understand how to work with underserved populations. He slid the paper toward Emma. They're interested in meeting you. Emma stared at the paper, hope and skepticism warring in her expression. Without references? Without an address? With my recommendation and Dr. Frank's. He knows people there. Thomas leaned forward, his voice earnest. This is just temporary, Emma. A hand up, not a handout. You'll get back on your feet, find your own place, rebuild your life, but you don't have to do it alone. Emma traced the edge of her nursing badge with one finger, her eyes distant. When I was treating patients in that warehouse, for a few hours I felt like myself again. Like I had a purpose, an identity beyond just surviving. She looked up at Thomas, a new resolve in her eyes. I need that back, not just for me, but for the twins. They deserve to see their mother as someone who helps people, not just someone who needs help. Thomas nodded, understanding completely. It was what he'd wanted Lily to see in him after Sarah died. Not just grief and struggle, but purpose and contribution. Then let's make it happen. As they continued planning into the night, the snow outside began to ease, the storm finally breaking. Neither of them noticed the change, too focused on building something new from the wreckage of their separate hardships, a bridge between past and future, between giving and receiving, between strangers and family. Outside, Boston began to emerge from the storm, just as Emma and Thomas were finding their way out of their own personal winters, guided by a small light they had decided to share. 3 days after Christmas, the storm strengthened its grip on Boston, transforming the city into a treacherous landscape of wind-sculpted snow and ice. Thomas stood transfixed before the small television in his apartment, a forgotten cup of coffee cooling in his hand. The local news anchor's voice cut through his morning routine with devastating clarity. Police are searching for a homeless woman and her twin 5-year-olds last seen near the downtown area before the latest snowstorm. Temperatures have dropped to dangerous levels overnight, raising concerns for their safety. The screen displayed a grainy photograph from the Pine Street shelter's security camera. Despite the poor quality, Thomas instantly recognized Emma and the twins. The image showed them leaving the shelter 3 days ago, Christmas Eve morning. Their postures hunched against the cold, Lucas and Lily holding their mother's hands as they stepped into the snow. The newscaster continued, her voice clinically detached. Emma Collins, 34, and her children were regular residents at the shelter until Christmas Eve. Anyone with information on their whereabouts is urged to contact authorities immediately. Thomas reached for his phone with trembling fingers, dialing the number displayed on screen. The police officer who answered took his information with professional efficiency, but offered little hope of immediate action. "We have multiple missing persons reports due to the storm, sir. We'll add your information to the case file." The dismissal was polite but clear. Emma and her children were just 3 more vulnerable people lost in a city struggling under the weight of winter's fury. A cold knot formed in Thomas's stomach as he ended the call. The conversation with the police only confirmed what he already knew. If Emma and the twins were to be found, he would have to find them himself. He dialed his supervisor's number, already anticipating the response. Jerry answered on the 4th ring, his voice rough with sleep despite the late morning hour. Thomas jumped straight to the point, skipping pleasantries. "I need emergency time off. Family situation." Jerry's laugh held no humor. "Family situation? You're scheduled for the Marshall Heights job in 2 hours. 6 units with frozen pipes. They're paying triple for holiday week emergency service. Find someone else." Thomas rarely made demands, his typical accommodation replaced by unfamiliar steel. "There are people missing in this storm who need my help." "People missing?" Jerry's voice sharpened. "Who, not Lily?" "A woman and her twins, the nurse who saved Lily last year." Thomas didn't elaborate further, already pulling on his heavy work boots with the phone wedged between ear and shoulder. Jerry's frustration traveled clearly through the connection. "Look, Reed, I get you want to be a good Samaritan, but we're already short-staffed. You walk off this job, don't expect me to hold your position. Plenty of plumbers looking for work these days." The threat hung between them. Unemployment in the middle of winter, with a daughter to support and bills already piling up. Thomas paused, one boot half-laced, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The image of Emma treating patients in that warehouse flashed through his mind, her dedication despite her own dire circumstances. His decision crystallized in that moment, priorities rearranging themselves with sudden clarity. "There are things more important than a job." The words emerged with quiet certainty, surprising even Thomas with their conviction. "I'll turn in my truck keys tomorrow if that's what you want, but today I'm finding Emma and her kids." He ended the call before Jerry could respond, the silence afterward filled only by the drone of the television still broadcasting the weather alert. Thomas finished lacing his boots and stood, mentally cataloging places to search. The logical starting point would be the shelters. If not Pine Street, then perhaps St. Francis or Harbor Light. His gaze fell on Lily's bedroom door, behind which his daughter still slept soundly, unaware of the morning's developments. He couldn't drag an 8-year-old through a blizzard on this search. A knock at the door interrupted his planning. Mrs. Patel stood in the hallway, a covered dish in her hands and concern etching deeper lines into her face. "I saw the news," she said without preamble. "Those poor children in this terrible cold." Thomas accepted the dish automatically, the warmth seeping through his gloves. I'm going to look for them. Could you? Lily can stay with me, Mrs. Patel finishing for him, anticipating his request. We will make chapati and watch movies. You find your friends. Her use of your friends rather than those people spoke volumes about how she viewed the situation. Thomas retrieved Emma's nursing badge from his nightstand, tucking it into his wallet next to the small school photo of Lily he always carried. A talisman, a connection to the woman he barely knew yet felt inexplicably bound to. He programmed his GPS for the first shelter on his mental list, then backtracked to the Pine Street location where Emma had last been seen. The city's snowplows had made a half-hearted attempt at clearing main thoroughfares, but side streets remained largely impassable. Thomas's truck lurched through snowdrifts, tires spinning when he took corners too quickly. His usual caution abandoned in favor of urgency. The Pine Street shelter stood like a fortress against the white landscape, its brick exterior crusted with ice where water had dripped from the roof. Inside, harried volunteers navigated between cots crammed into every available space. The capacity sign by the entrance read 120, but Thomas estimated at least 150 people crowded the main floor, many sitting two to a cot, others on chairs or directly on the floor. The air hung heavy with the mingled scents of unwashed bodies, institutional disinfectant, and the vegetable soup being ladled from industrial-sized pots in the adjoining kitchen. A volunteer coordinator with bloodshot eyes and a name tag reading Marissa barely glanced at the photo on Thomas's phone. She left Christmas Eve morning, said something about a medical outreach program, but we've had no contact since. She moved to attend to a new arrival, shivering violently by the entrance, her attention already redirected to more immediate concerns. Thomas persisted, falling into step beside her. Medical outreach? Do you know where? Which organization? Marissa's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. Look, we had 47 new arrivals overnight. I don't have time to... She paused, recognition flickering across her features. Wait, Emma Collins, right? Twins named after literary characters or something? Lucas and Lily, Thomas confirmed, hope flaring. Check with Father Mike at St. Anthony's on Cambridge Street. He runs a mobile clinic out of his church basement. She mentioned his name when she left. Marissa turned away, already calling instructions to another volunteer. St. Anthony's proved a dead end. Father Mike hadn't seen Emma, though he knew her by reputation as one of the good ones from Boston Memorial. 3 more shelters yielded nothing but sympathetic headshakes and hollow wishes of good luck. The storm intensified as afternoon wore on, visibility reducing to mere yards ahead of Thomas's windshield. He pulled into a gas station to refuel and collect his thoughts, the bright fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the gray world outside. Inside, the cashier watched local news on a small television mounted behind the counter. The screen showed footage of emergency vehicles surrounding a collapsed building in the Old Port District. Partial roof collapse at Harbor Point, the ticker read. Multiple people trapped inside abandoned warehouse. Thomas approached the counter, attention fixed on the screen. Where is that exactly? The cashier rattled off directions without taking his eyes from the broadcast. Bad situation. They're saying homeless people were using it as a shelter. Roof couldn't handle the snow load. Thomas was back in his truck before the man finished speaking, tires spraying slush as he accelerated onto the road. The warehouse district sprawled across the northeastern edge of the city, once the pulsing heart of Boston's shipping industry, now largely abandoned as operations moved to modern facilities across the harbor. Remaining buildings stood as hollow monuments to faded commerce, their broken windows and graffiti-covered walls testimony to decades of neglect. Police barricades blocked direct access to the collapsed warehouse, emergency lights painting the snow in alternating red and blue flashes. Thomas parked half a block away, continuing on foot through snow that reached mid-calf. An officer attempted to wave him back, but Thomas pointed toward the building with desperate insistence. My friend is in there, a nurse with twin children. If your friend is inside, the rescue team will find them. The officer's tone left no room for argument. Stand back with the others. A small crowd had gathered despite the weather, some clearly homeless themselves, others likely from nearby businesses or apartments. Thomas scanned their faces, looking for any sign of Emma or the twins. Instead, his attention caught on an elderly man with a white beard huddled under an emergency blanket, giving instructions to a paramedic. Thomas pushed his way through the onlookers. "Dr. Frank?" The old doctor looked up, recognition dawning slowly through eyes glazed with shock. "The plumber. Thomas. Wasn't it?" He gestured toward the warehouse with a trembling hand. "You're looking for Emma. She's in there, working triage. The twins are safe. They were in the east corner where the roof held." Relief and fresh anxiety battled in Thomas's chest. "They're letting her help? In there?" "Letting her?" Dr. Frank's laugh emerged as a hoarse bark. "They couldn't stop her. When the ceiling started to crack, she evacuated the children first, then went back for the elderly patients. By the time authorities arrived, she had organized the able-bodied into rescue teams." Pride colored his words despite the dire circumstances. "The fire department put her in charge of medical response until their paramedics could navigate this mess." A commotion near the building entrance drew their attention. Rescue workers emerged carrying a stretcher, a figure beneath a silver thermal blanket being rushed toward a waiting ambulance. Behind them walked Emma, her coat dusted with plaster dust and insulation, giving instructions to a firefighter as they moved. Even from a distance, Thomas could see the authority in her posture, the confidence that came from operating in her element despite the chaos surrounding her. Thomas started forward, only to be intercepted by a police officer. "Sir, you need to stay behind the line." "That's my—" Thomas hesitated, uncertain how to categorize Emma. Friends seemed insufficient, yet claiming any closer relationship would be presumptuous. "That's the mother of my daughter's friends. I've been searching for them all day." The officer's expression softened marginally. "Wait here. I'll tell her you're looking for her." Thomas watched the officer approach Emma, saw her turn toward where he stood, her face registering surprise then relief. She nodded to the firefighter, handed him a clipboard, and made her way through the emergency vehicles toward Thomas. Up close, the toll of the day was evident in the shadows beneath her eyes and the pallor beneath smudges of dirt on her face. Yet something had changed since he'd found her at the bakery. A restored purpose animated her movements, a return of the professional assurance he'd glimpsed during Lily's hospitalization. "The twins?" Thomas asked immediately, his breath forming white clouds between them. Emma gestured toward a nearby emergency response van with its rear doors open. "They're inside with a social worker. They're okay. Scared but not hurt." Her voice held the particular flatness of someone operating on adrenaline and willpower alone. "How did you find us?" "I've been looking everywhere since I saw the news this morning." Thomas fought the urge to embrace her, sensing she needed the professional distance while still in crisis response mode. "The shelter reported you missing." Emma closed her eyes briefly, swaying slightly on her feet. "I didn't think they'd notice. We left during shift change." She pushed hair away from her face with a grimy hand. "The warehouse seems safer than the streets. There were doctors here, Dr. Frank, 2 retired nurses. We had basic supplies. It was working until tons of snow collapsed the roof." Thomas couldn't keep the edge from his voice, the fear he'd carried all day crystallizing into retroactive anger. "Emma, you could have died. The twins could have—" "I know." She cut him off, eyes snapping open with sudden ferocity. "Don't you think I know that? Every decision I make could be the wrong one, could be the last one. Every day is impossible choices between bad and worse." Her composure cracked, voice breaking on the final word. Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm sorry, I was scared. When I saw the news—" A paramedic approached before Emma could respond. "Nurse Collins, we need you. Crushing injury, probable pneumothorax." Emma straightened immediately, professional mask sliding back into place. "I have to go. The twins—" "I'll stay with them," Thomas assured her. "Do what you need to do." He watched her hurry back toward the building with the paramedic, her steps purposeful despite obvious exhaustion. The contrast between this capable professional and the woman begging for bread outside a bakery struck him with new force. Emma Collins wasn't just a victim of circumstances. She was a healer temporarily knocked off course, her essential nature unchanged by hardship. The emergency response van hummed with the vibration of a generator powering portable heaters. Inside, Lucas and Lily sat wrapped in blankets on a bench seat, a young woman in a Red Cross vest showing them pictures in a book. The twins looked up as Thomas appeared in the doorway, their expressions brightening with recognition. Mr. Thomas, Lucas exclaimed, sliding from the bench and rushing toward him. Did you see the ceiling fall down? It was so loud. Lily followed her brother, more reserved but equally glad to see a familiar face. Mommy is helping the hurt people. She told us to be brave. Thomas knelt to their level, checking them over with careful eyes. Beyond the smudges of dirt and tear tracks on their cheeks, they appeared unharmed. You both have been very brave. He looked up at the social worker. I'm Thomas Reed. I've been helping Emma, Ms. Collins, and the children. The social worker's skepticism was professional rather than personal. The children mentioned you. You're not a relative, though? A friend. The word felt inadequate, but would have to suffice for now. Emma and the twins stayed with me on Christmas Eve. The woman made a notation on her clipboard. Once the immediate crisis is contained, we'll need to make arrangements for the children. Ms. Collins will be needed here for some time, and with no stable housing situation, the implication hung in the air. The twins might be taken into emergency foster care, separated from their mother until she could establish a stable living situation. The bureaucratic machinery was already in motion, its gears inexorable once engaged. Thomas straightened, decision made before he'd consciously formed it. They have stable housing. With me. Emma and the twins have been staying at my apartment. The lie slipped out easily, justified by the greater good of keeping the family together. The social worker's expression remained neutral, though her eyes sharpened. I'll need to verify that. Of course, I can take you to my place, show you their room. Thomas produced his wallet, extracting his driver's license and a business card. I'm a licensed plumber with my own business. My daughter Lily is 8. We have plenty of space. The lie expanded, taking on weight and dimension. Thomas knew his small apartment hardly qualified as plenty of space, but the alternative, watching the twins disappear into the foster system while Emma fought to reclaim them, was unthinkable. I'll need to discuss this with Miss Collins. The social worker's tone softened slightly, but having a confirmed residence would certainly simplify matters during this emergency. Thomas spent the next hour with the twins, distracting them with stories and small games, while emergency operations continued around them. As darkness fell, the immediate rescue phase transitioned to recovery and assessment. Floodlights illuminated the damaged warehouse, casting long shadows across snow packed down by emergency vehicles and personnel. The temperature dropped further, the night air crystallizing breath into white plumes. Emma finally returned to the van, medical gloves removed but scrubs still visible beneath her open coat. Exhaustion etched deep lines around her mouth and eyes, yet satisfaction radiated from her. The unique fulfillment of a medical professional who has made a difference against impossible odds. 3 critical patients stabilized and transported to Mass General, she reported. The words clearly meant for the twins rather than Thomas. Everyone else has minor injuries or just needed warming. You two were the best helpers by staying safe. The social worker approached, clipboard still in hand. Ms. Collins, I need to confirm your living situation. Mr. Reed here states you and your children have been staying at his residence? Emma's eyes flickered to Thomas, confusion momentarily breaking through her fatigue before understanding dawned. She didn't hesitate. Yes, that's correct, since Christmas Eve. The woman made another notation. And this arrangement is temporary but stable, Emma supplied smoothly. Thomas has been kind enough to provide housing while I secure new employment. The practiced ease of the lie suggested this wasn't the first time Emma had navigated bureaucratic inquiries with strategic omissions. The social worker seemed satisfied, if not entirely convinced. I'll make a note in the file. Given the circumstances and the children's apparent comfort with Mr. Reed, I won't recommend emergency placement tonight. She lowered her voice, though the twins were distracted by a stuffed animal another volunteer had brought them. However, a follow-up home visit will be required within 72 hours. After exchanging contact information and signing several forms, Emma was finally released from her impromptu medical duties. The twins, despite their earlier animation, were fading rapidly as reactions set in. Thomas carried Lucas while Emma held Lily, both children half asleep before they reached the truck. The drive to Thomas's apartment passed in weighted silence, Emma staring out the passenger window at the city transformed by snow and night. Only when they were parked did she turn to him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. You told them we live with you. Thomas met her gaze directly. They were going to take the twins into emergency foster care. I couldn't let that happen. So you lied. The words held no accusation, merely tired acknowledgement. I created a possibility. Thomas's hands remained on the steering wheel, gripping it as if it might anchor him against the improvised future he'd just committed them to. The alternative was watching them separate you from your children tonight. Would you have preferred that? Emma closed her eyes, defeat momentarily visible in the slump of her shoulders. No, thank you. She reached for the door handle, then paused. But this can't be permanent, Thomas. You have your own life, your daughter, your space. We can't just insert ourselves into that indefinitely. Thomas released the steering wheel, turning fully toward her. Let's worry about indefinitely later. Right now, let's get these kids inside where it's warm. Mrs. Patel appeared in her doorway as they carried the sleeping twins up the stairs, Lily trailing behind with a drawing she'd made for Lucas and his sister. The elderly woman took in the scene with a nod of satisfaction, as if a prediction had been fulfilled. The little ones can sleep in my apartment tonight if you need more space. Thomas shook his head, touched by the offer. We'll manage. Thank you for watching Lily today. Anytime. Mrs. Patel's knowing smile followed them into Thomas's apartment. Family helps family. The evening settled into unexpected domesticity, baths for dust-covered children, simple sandwiches eaten at the kitchen table, temporary sleeping arrangements negotiated and implemented. Lily insisted the twins share her room, dragging her mattress onto the floor to create what she called a sleep party. The children's resilience manifested in their rapid transition from trauma to play, already giggling over shadow puppets projected on the bedroom wall by Lily's nightlight. Thomas found Emma standing in his bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror as if confronting a stranger. Her scrubs bore evidence of the day's chaos, smears of plaster dust, what might have been blood near the collar, a torn pocket. She'd washed her face, but fatigue remained etched in the fine lines around her eyes, the downward turn of her mouth. I found some of Sarah's clothes, Thomas said softly, placing a folded stack on the edge of the sink. They might be a little big, but they're clean. Emma's gaze met his in the mirror. Sarah was your wife? I'm sorry, I don't want to intrude on... You're not intruding. Thomas leaned against the door frame, keeping a respectful distance. They're just sitting in boxes. She would have wanted them used. Emma nodded, fingers brushing the topmost item, a soft gray sweater. Thank you. Her reflection frowned suddenly, eyes narrowing in concentration. Thomas, there's something I need to tell you, something I discovered today. Thomas straightened, alerted by the change in her tone. What is it? When the roof collapsed, I found myself working alongside a doctor from Mass General. He recognized me from Boston Memorial, asked why I'd left. Emma turned from the mirror to face him directly. We got talking between patients and I mentioned your daughter's case from last year, the head injury from the playground fall. Thomas nodded, uncertain where this was leading. You saved her life, stayed with her for 8 hours straight. It wasn't just that. Emma's fingers twisted together, a nervous gesture at odds with her usual composure. After Lily was stable, the hospital's insurance company tried to classify her injury as resulting from parental negligence. They wanted to avoid paying the full claim. Cold understanding washed through Thomas. And you fought them. I documented everything properly, testified that it was clearly an accident, that your supervision had been appropriate. Emma's words emerged faster now, as if relieved to finally share this burden. The insurance company backed down, but the hospital administration wasn't happy. I'd cost them a potential recovery from your insurance. So when the hospital started having financial problems, I was one of the first they let go, officially for budget reasons, but... Emma shrugged, the movement eloquent in its resignation. I'd made enemies by choosing a patient's family over corporate interest. Thomas absorbed this revelation, pieces clicking into place. You lost your job because of us, because of me and Lily. Because I did what was right, Emma corrected firmly. That's not the same as losing everything because of you. I kept my integrity. I kept my ability to sleep at night. Thomas stepped into the bathroom, the small space suddenly intimate with their shared history. You never mentioned this when we met at the bakery. or at the hospital when you were treating Lily. It wasn't relevant to her care. Emma's chin lifted slightly, professional pride momentarily overriding exhaustion. And outside the hospital, well, it wasn't something you needed to carry. You had enough on your shoulders with an injured child. The selflessness of the gesture struck Thomas with physical force, a tightness in his chest that made breathing difficult. This woman had sacrificed her professional standing to protect him and Lily, then faced homelessness with her own children, rather than burden him with guilt or obligation. The casual heroism of it, the matter-of-fact decency, left him momentarily speechless. Emma, whatever Thomas might have said was interrupted by the apartment's buzzer, three insistent bursts that suggested whoever was downstairs had already pressed it multiple times. Thomas moved to the intercom by the front door. Yes? Thomas Reed, this is Robert Harrington. I'd like to speak with you and Ms. Collins. The voice through the speaker carried the particular crisp authority of someone accustomed to being immediately obeyed. Thomas and Emma exchanged confused glances. Robert Harrington? The Robert Harrington, Thomas asked quietly. Emma shrugged, equally mystified. From Harrington Development? Owner of half of downtown? My building manager mentioned you were involved in the warehouse rescue operation today. The voice continued impatiently. May I come up? Thomas pressed the entry button, mind racing. The Harrington name appeared on skyscrapers throughout Boston, on hospital wings and university buildings, attached to one of the city's oldest and wealthiest families. Robert Harrington himself was rarely seen in public, his philanthropy conducted through foundations and representatives rather than personal appearances. The man who appeared at Thomas's door minutes later was in his early 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, despite the late hour and weather conditions. He carried himself with the unconscious authority of generational wealth, yet his handshake was firm and unpretentious, his assessment of Thomas's modest apartment free of obvious judgment. Thank you for seeing me without notice. Harrington declined Thomas's awkward offer of coffee, remaining standing as if the visit would be brief. I'll come directly to the point. The warehouse that partially collapsed today is one of my family's properties. It was scheduled for redevelopment in the spring. Thomas tensed, wondering if this visit presaged legal action. The homeless occupants had been trespassing, technically speaking, even if their presence had been an act of desperate necessity. Harrington continued, his gaze shifting to Emma, who had changed into Sarah's gray sweater and a pair of jeans. Ms. Collins, I understand you coordinated medical response both before and after emergency services arrived. The fire chief spoke very highly of your competence under extreme conditions. Emma stepped forward, professional demeanor intact despite the incongruity of the wealthy developer standing in their small living room. The real credit goes to Dr. Franklin Winters and the other medical volunteers who established the outreach station. I merely assisted when the emergency occurred. Dr. Winters tells a different story. Harrington's expression softened slightly. He says you saved 3 lives today with minimal supplies and exceptional skill. Emma's cheeks colored faintly. I was just doing my job, or what used to be my job at least. That's precisely why I'm here. Harrington reached into his coat, producing a business card which he handed to Emma. The Harrington Foundation funds several community health initiatives, including a new mobile medical unit scheduled to launch next month. We need an experienced coordinator, someone who understands how to work with underserved populations. Emma stared at the card as if it might disappear. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you an interview. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Harrington's tone made clear the distinction was a formality. The position includes a competitive salary, health insurance, and assistance with housing placement. Thomas watched the play of emotions across Emma's face. Hope, suspicion, disbelief, cautious excitement. She'd been knocked down so many times that good fortune now appeared as a potential trap rather than opportunity. Why me? Emma finally asked, the question direct and unvarnished. There must be dozens of qualified nurses in Boston. None who performed emergency medicine in a collapsing building today. Harrington's answer came with equal directness. None who chose a patient's welfare over corporate policy at Boston Memorial, a decision that cost them their job. Emma's eyes widened. How did you? Boston is a small city in certain circles, Ms. Collins. Medical administrators talk to each other. Your reputation preceded you. Harrington glanced at his watch. I should go. My driver's waiting. As he moved toward the door, he paused beside Thomas. The building manager mentioned you were the one who repaired the pipes at Harrington Tower on Christmas Eve. Emergency call, wasn't it? Thomas nodded, still processing the unexpected turn events had taken. Yes, sir. Burst pipe on the mechanical level. Good work. I'm told it saved us considerable water damage. Harrington extended his hand again. Your company name? Reed Plumbing, as Thomas answered automatically. But it's just me, not really a company. Perhaps it should be. Harrington's handshake was brief but firm. We're always looking for reliable contractors for our residential properties, particularly those who understand the needs of tenants in affordable housing units. With that enigmatic statement, he was gone, leaving Thomas and Emma staring at the closed door in stunned silence. The potential lifeline he'd thrown them seemed too perfectly timed, too neatly packaged to be coincidence. Yet the alternative, that Robert Harrington had deliberately sought them out based on Thomas's emergency repair and Emma's actions during the warehouse collapse, seemed equally implausible. Did that just happen? Emma finally asked, Harrington's business card still clutched in her hand. Did one of Boston's wealthiest developers just offer me a job interview at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday? Thomas shook his head, bewilderment giving way to cautious optimism. I think he did more than that. I think he just offered us both a future. The moment of shared wonder was interrupted by Thomas's phone ringing. The caller ID showed his mother's name, unusual for this time of night. Carla Reed had relocated to Florida after her husband's death, her contact with Thomas and Lily largely limited to holiday calls and occasional summer visits. Thomas answered with concern evident in his voice. Mom, is everything okay? Everything is fine, Carla replied, her southern accent strengthened by years in Florida despite her Boston origins. I just saw the news about that warehouse collapse. They interviewed some nurse named Emma Collins, who helped with the rescue. Wasn't that the name of Lily's nurse last year? The one who stayed with her all night? Thomas caught Emma's questioning look and mouthed my mother while responding. Yes, same person. Actually, she's here right now. She and her twins are staying with us for a few days. The silence that followed conveyed Carla's disapproval more effectively than words could have. When she finally spoke, her voice had cooled considerably. Staying with you? Thomas Joseph Reed, what are you thinking? You barely know this woman. I know she saved Lily's life. Thomas kept his tone even with effort. I know she lost her job because she defended us against an insurance company. And I know she and her children had nowhere else to go during the worst storm in years. So you're what, running a shelter now? The sarcasm in Carla's voice was cutting. You can barely make ends meet for you and Lily. How are you going to support 3 more people? It's temporary, Mom, just until Emma gets back on her feet. Thomas moved toward the kitchen for privacy, aware that Emma could still hear his side of the conversation. She has a job interview tomorrow with the Harrington Foundation. The Harringtons? Carla's tone shifted from disapproval to wary interest. Well, that would certainly be a step up. But Thomas, you need to be careful. You can't save everyone. You have Lily to think about. Thomas leaned against the kitchen counter, fatigue and frustration combining to sharpen his response. I haven't forgotten about Lily for a single moment, and I'm not trying to save everyone, just one family who deserves better than what life has handed them lately. You sound like your father. Carla's voice softened momentarily, nostalgia briefly overriding concern. Always taking in strays, always fixing broken things. Dad taught me that some things are worth fixing. Thomas glanced toward the living room where Emma sat on the edge of the sofa, her posture suggesting she was trying not to listen while inevitably hearing every word. Some people are worth helping, even when it's inconvenient or difficult. Carla sighed, the sound traveling clearly through the connection. I'll be watching the weather reports. If things don't improve by Friday, I'm coming up there. Someone needs to make sure you're not being taken advantage of. After ending the call, Thomas returned to the living room. Emma looked up, her expression guarded. Your mother disapproves. My mother disapproves of most things I do. Thomas settled on the opposite end of the sofa, giving Emma space while still conveying solidarity. She'll come around when she meets you and the twins. You say that with surprising confidence for someone who just had what sounded like a fairly contentious conversation. Emma's attempt at humor couldn't quite mask her concern. Thomas smiled faintly. Mom's bark is worse than her bite. and she loves Lily more than anything. When she sees how the twins and Lily have bonded, she'll adjust her perspective. Emma studied the business card in her hand, tracing the embossed Harrington Foundation logo with her fingertip. Thomas, what if this job doesn't work out? What if the interview is just a formality and they've already chosen someone else? What if, then we'll figure something else out? Thomas interrupted the spiral of doubt before it could gain momentum. One step at a time. Remember, tomorrow you interview. Tomorrow I call my supervisor and either keep my job or start looking for a new one. Tomorrow we deal with the social worker's follow-up. One step at a time, Emma repeated, the mantra seeming to steady her. It's been so long since I've had the luxury of planning beyond the next meal or the next night's shelter. It almost feels dangerous to hope again. Hope isn't dangerous, Thomas countered gently. Giving up is dangerous. And you didn't give up even when you were homeless with 2 children in a Boston winter. You were still helping others in that warehouse, still being a nurse even without a hospital. Emma's eyes filled suddenly, the day's events and emotional revelations finally breaking through her carefully maintained composure. I don't know if I can do this interview. I don't have proper clothes. I don't have references. I don't even have an address that isn't a homeless shelter. You have an address now, Thomas gestured around the apartment. And as for clothes, he hesitated, then continued carefully. Sarah left a lot behind, professional clothes that haven't been worn in 4 years. I've kept meaning to donate them, but he trailed off, the explanation unnecessary. Emma wiped her eyes with the sleeve of the borrowed sweater. Wearing your dead wife's clothes to a job interview. That's not weird at all. The unexpected flash of gallows humor startled a laugh from Thomas. When you put it that way, it does sound like the setup for a particularly dark independent film. Their shared laughter, brief though it was, released some of the tension that had built throughout the tumultuous day. In its wake, a companionable quiet settled between them, the kind of silence that exists only between people who have weathered a crisis together. The following morning unfolded in orchestrated chaos. 4 people attempting to navigate bathroom schedules, breakfast preparation, and the children's innate talent for misplacing essential items. Emma disappeared into Thomas's bedroom with several options from Sarah's wardrobe, emerging 30 minutes later in a simple navy dress with a cardigan, her hair neatly styled, minimal makeup enhancing rather than masking her features. The transformation wasn't just physical. She carried herself differently, professional confidence temporarily overshadowing recent hardships. Thomas, preparing lunches for the children, paused mid-sandwich at the sight of her. You look... He searched for words that wouldn't cross invisible boundaries. Ready, capable. Emma smoothed non-existent wrinkles from the dress, clearly nervous despite her composed exterior. It fits almost perfectly. Your wife had good taste. She did. Thomas handed her a travel mug of coffee. The dress was always one of her favorites for important meetings. She said it made her feel like she could handle anything. Emma accepted the mug, her fingers brushing his in the exchange. Thomas, there's something else I need to tell you. Something I found last night while going through the clothes. Before she could continue, Lucas raced into the kitchen, brandishing a small toy car. Look what Lily gave me. It goes super fast. The moment broken, Emma glanced at the clock and inhaled sharply. I should go. The interview is across town, and with this snow... I'll drive you, Thomas offered immediately. Mrs. Patel already agreed to watch all 3 kids until school reopens tomorrow. Take your time. Make your best impression. Emma knelt to kiss the twins goodbye, whispering something in each child's ear that made them stand a little straighter, their small faces solemn with the weight of maternal expectations. To Thomas's surprise, she then hugged Lily as well, the gesture natural and unforced. The drive to the Harrington Foundation offices in Back Bay passed too quickly for the conversation Emma had attempted to initiate at home. Downtown Boston had been plowed and salted overnight, the financial and commercial districts receiving priority attention that residential neighborhoods still awaited. The foundation occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass tower, its lobby a testament to understated wealth. Marble floors, living walls of carefully tended plants, security that managed to be both unobtrusive and omnipresent. Thomas pulled up to the passenger drop-off area, putting the truck in park but leaving the engine running. "I'll find parking and wait in the lobby. Take as long as you need." Emma's hand paused on the door handle, uncertainty momentarily overtaking her professional facade. What if they ask about the warehouse? About why I was there with my children instead of in proper housing? What if they see me as irresponsible rather than resourceful? Tell the truth. Thomas reached across the console to briefly cover her hand with his. You lost your job because you stood up for what was right. You did everything possible to keep your family together and safe. You continued using your medical skills to help others even when you had nothing yourself. Emma drew a steadying breath, then nodded once. The same barely perceptible movement she'd given outside the bakery on Christmas Eve, a subtle signal of courage gathered and decision made. The truth then, all of it. Thomas watched her walk into the building, back straight, head high, looking every inch the medical professional she was, rather than the homeless mother she'd been just days ago. The duality struck him as profoundly unfair. How quickly circumstances could strip away identity, how arbitrary the line between professional and destitute could be for so many. He found parking in an underground garage, the expense adding to his growing list of financial concerns. His phone showed 3 missed calls from Jerry, his supervisor, along with a terse text message. Decision time, read, you in or out. Thomas stared at the screen, weighing responsibilities and possibilities. Finally, he typed a response. I quit. Truck is clean and gassed up. We'll drop keys at office tomorrow. The decision, once made, brought unexpected relief rather than anxiety. Thomas had been chafing under Jerry's management for years, accepting unfavorable assignments and pay because the flexibility allowed him to be present for Lily. Now, with Emma and the twins temporarily dependent on him as well, that compromise no longer seemed sustainable. In the Harrington Foundation's vast marble lobby, Thomas found a seat with a view of both main elevators and the security desk. He'd wait as long as necessary, a silent show of support even if Emma couldn't see him from the interview floors above. His phone buzzed with another text, this one from Mrs. Patel reporting that the children were happily building a fort from couch cushions and all was well. Thomas settled in for a long wait, mentally calculating next steps depending on the interview outcome. If Emma got the job, they'd need to find her an apartment quickly. If not, he'd tap his limited network for other medical opportunities. Either way, the temporary arrangement at his apartment would need adjustment. His mother's impending visit would force the issue if nothing else did. He was so absorbed in contingency planning that he almost missed Emma's return to the lobby. She emerged from the elevator bank looking simultaneously exhilarated and shell-shocked, clutching a leather portfolio that hadn't been in her possession earlier. Thomas stood, searching her expression for clues about the interview's outcome. Before he could ask, Emma crossed the lobby in quick strides and did something entirely unexpected. She threw her arms around him in a fierce hug. I got it, she whispered against his shoulder. They offered me the job on the spot. 6 months after that fateful Christmas Eve encounter outside Peterson's bakery, Boston's punishing winter had yielded to summer's generous warmth. The city moved at a different rhythm now. Windows thrown open to catch ocean breezes, public gardens bursting with color, children's laughter echoing from playgrounds where months earlier only snow had accumulated. In a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Dorchester, not far from Thomas's place, Emma Collins carefully applied sunscreen to her twins' faces before their weekend outing. The apartment was small but immaculately kept, colorful children's artwork taped to the refrigerator, second-hand furniture arranged to maximize the limited space. From the kitchen counter, Emma's phone chimed with a text notification. Thomas's name appeared on the screen alongside a message confirming their afternoon plans. A picnic in the public garden, followed by swan boat rides, weather permitting. Such outings had become a weekend tradition over the past few months, the two families gradually intertwining their lives in small, meaningful increments. Lily had become inseparable from the twins, the 3 children forming bonds that defied their lack of biological connection. Emma tucked sunscreen and water bottles into a backpack while Lucas and Lily bounced on their toes by the door, impatient for adventure. The transformation in their lives since Christmas remains somewhat miraculous in Emma's mind, from homelessness to stability in half a year, from desperation to cautious optimism. The Harrington Foundation job had exceeded her expectations, offering not just financial security, but purpose. Her mobile medical unit now served 3 different homeless encampments weekly, providing care to those who would otherwise fall through healthcare's widening cracks. A knock at the door sent the twins racing to answer it, their excited voices confirming Thomas and Lily's arrival. Emma watched the joyful reunion unfold, Thomas high-fiving Lucas, while Lily immediately launched into an elaborate account of her latest school art project. The comfortable familiarity between them all still surprised Emma sometimes, how quickly they'd formed what increasingly felt like a family unit, how naturally Thomas had integrated into her children's lives, and she into Lily's. Thomas caught her eye over the children's heads, his smile carrying warmth that extended beyond mere friendship. Ready for some duck watching and boat riding? His casual tone belied the careful attention in his gaze, always checking her well-being, always noticing the small shifts in her mood. Emma shouldered her backpack, returning his smile with equal warmth. More than ready. I've been staring at medical supply inventories all morning. The months since her hiring had been intense but fulfilling. Starting the mobile unit had required endless planning, training volunteer medical staff, establishing protocols, and coordinating with city services. Through it all, Thomas had remained her steadfast support, offering practical help and emotional ballast in equal measure. The public garden glowed emerald under the June sun, paths crowded with tourists and locals alike seeking refuge beneath century-old trees. The children raced ahead toward the pond where swan boats glided in lazy circles, Thomas and Emma following at a more measured pace. Their shoulders occasionally brushed as they walked, each contact a small acknowledgement of the unspoken shift in their relationship. No longer merely friends bound by circumstance, but two people deliberately choosing each other's company. They spread their picnic blanket beneath a sprawling maple, the dappled sunlight creating shifting patterns across their impromptu feast. Thomas had brought his specialty, cucumber sandwiches cut into precise triangles, the way Lily preferred them. Emma contributed homemade lemonade and fresh strawberries, simple offerings that nonetheless represented her newfound ability to provide. The children devoured everything with the particular enthusiasm of the young, then begged for permission to feed the ducks while the adults finished their meal. "Stay where we can see you," Emma cautioned, watching as the 3 children scampered off toward the pond's edge. A small bag of approved duck feed clutched in Lucas's hand. Thomas leaned back on his elbows, face tilted toward the sun filtering through the leaves above. They're different children than they were at Christmas. The observation came softly, his eyes tracking the twins as they carefully doled out food for the waiting waterfowl. More confident, more joyful. Emma nodded, throat tightening unexpectedly. Having a home changes everything. Knowing where you'll sleep each night, where your next meal will come from. She drew her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture that echoed her defensive posture from months ago, though now it held contemplation rather than fear. "I still wake up sometimes in a panic, thinking we're back in that shelter or the warehouse." Thomas reached over, his hand covering hers briefly. "But you're not. You never will be again." Emma turned her palm upward, interlacing her fingers with his, a gesture that had become more common between them in recent weeks. "Because of you. Because you stopped when everyone else walked past." Thomas shook his head, his expression serious despite the festive atmosphere surrounding them. "You've done this yourself, Emma. The shame, the apartment, the new life you've built, that's all you. I just provided a temporary bridge." "Bridges matter," Emma countered, her voice soft but firm. "Without them, you can't cross from where you are to where you need to be." The moment stretched between them, weighted with things still unsaid, possibilities still unexplored. Their growing closeness remained cautious, each advance measured and deliberate. Thomas still carried Sarah's absence like a familiar weight. Emma still balanced between gratitude and independence, careful not to mistake appreciation for deeper emotion. The children had no such reservations. In their uncomplicated view, they were already a family in all the ways that mattered. Their contemplation was interrupted by Lily racing back, excitement radiating from her small face. "Mr. Harrington is here. By the big statue, he wants to talk to you both." Thomas and Emma exchanged surprised glances before gathering their picnic supplies and following Lily's pointing finger toward the equestrian statue at the garden center. Robert Harrington stood there in casual weekend attire, pressed khakis and a light blue button-down rather than his usual business suits, looking oddly accessible despite his wealth and influence. "I hope you'll forgive the interruption." Harrington's greeting came with an apologetic smile. "My granddaughter spotted Lily and insisted we come say hello." He gestured toward a young girl around Lily's age examining a flower bed nearby, her resemblance to Harrington unmistakable in the sharp intelligence of her eyes. Pleasantries were exchanged, the children introducing themselves with varying degrees of shyness. Harrington seemed genuinely interested in their responses, demonstrating the same focused attention he brought to business meetings. When the children wandered off again, drawn by the promise of ice cream from a nearby vendor, his expression shifted to something more purposeful. "I've been meaning to contact you both about a proposal." Harrington gestured to a nearby bench, inviting them to sit. "The foundation board met yesterday regarding the Harbor Point warehouse property, the one that partially collapsed during the winter storm." Emma tensed slightly at the mention of the warehouse. Memories of that chaotic day still vivid in her mind. The sound of buckling timber, children crying, the desperate scramble to evacuate patients before the remaining structure gave way. Harrington continued, seemingly unaware of her discomfort. "The property has been vacant since the collapse. Initial plans called for luxury condominiums, but I've proposed an alternative, converting it into a comprehensive support center for homeless families." Thomas leaned forward, immediately engaged. "What kind of support center?" "Medical services, temporary housing, job training, childcare, legal assistance, everything a family needs to transition from crisis to stability." Harrington's eyes met Emma's directly. "Your mobile medical unit has demonstrated remarkable success over the past months. I'd like to expand that model into something more permanent, with you as medical director." The proposal hung in the air between them, unexpected and staggering in its scope. Emma's mind raced with possibilities. The needs she'd observed firsthand in Boston's homeless population, the gaps in existing services, the potential impact of a truly integrated approach. "And Thomas," Harrington continued, "the project would need someone to oversee the facility's physical infrastructure, someone who understands both the technical requirements and the human element." Thomas's contracting business had grown steadily since his departure from Jerry's company. Starting with the Harrington Foundation's affordable housing units, he'd built a reputation for quality work at fair prices, particularly for low-income clients. What Harrington proposed represented a significant expansion of his role, from contractor to facility manager, from temporary repairs to sustained oversight. "The project faces significant challenges," Harrington admitted, his tone measured. "Zoning restrictions, neighborhood resistance, structural limitations of the existing building. It won't be simple or quick." Emma and Thomas exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. The prospect was simultaneously thrilling and daunting, a chance to create something truly meaningful together, but also a commitment that would fundamentally alter both their lives. "We'll need time to consider it," Emma finally responded, her professional training asserting itself despite her immediate personal interest. "This would be a major change for both of us." Harrington nodded, seeming unsurprised by her caution. "Of course, I've had preliminary renderings prepared, architectural concepts rather than final plans. I'll have them sent to both of you tomorrow. Take a week, talk it through, then let's meet again." After Harrington departed, rejoining his granddaughter by the ice cream cart, Thomas and Emma remained on the bench, the festive park atmosphere continuing around them while they absorbed the proposition's implications. Thomas broke the silence first, his voice thoughtful rather than pressuring. "What's your initial reaction?" Emma took a moment before answering, organizing her thoughts. "It's everything I've wanted to create since my first week at the shelter. Integrated services, continuity of care, addressing root causes rather than just symptoms." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "But the scale of it, the responsibility, it's overwhelming." "We could build something extraordinary," Thomas mused, eyes tracking the children as they returned with ice cream cones, faces already smeared with evidence of their treat. "A place like that would have changed everything for you and the twins 6 months ago." Emma nodded, the truth of his observation undeniable. That's exactly why I want to say yes immediately. But, but there are complications, Thomas finished for her, understanding without elaboration. Their relationship existed in a delicate balance, personal feelings increasingly intertwined with professional aspirations, the boundaries between gratitude and genuine affection sometimes blurring. Taking on a major project together would either strengthen their connection or strain it to breaking point. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of meetings, site visits, and late-night planning sessions. The preliminary renderings Harrington had promised revealed an ambitious vision. The warehouse transformed into a modern facility with apartments for transitional housing, medical clinic, job training center, childcare facilities, and community spaces. The existing structure's industrial elements would be preserved where possible, creating a unique aesthetic that honored the building's history while serving its new purpose. Emma threw herself into planning the medical component, drawing on her hospital experience and recent work with the mobile unit. Thomas analyzed the building's systems, identifying crucial upgrades needed for water, electrical, and HVAC infrastructure. Their professional collaboration flowed naturally, each respecting the other's expertise while contributing perspective from their own field. The first major obstacle emerged during a meeting with city planning officials. The warehouse district's zoning regulations prohibited residential use, a critical component of the proposed center. The variance required would need approval from multiple municipal departments and the neighborhood council, a process notorious for delays and rejections. We're looking at a 6-month minimum for zoning approval, the foundation's lawyer explained, scrolling through a daunting timeline on his tablet, and that's assuming no organized opposition. Organized opposition materialized almost immediately. The Harbor Business Association, representing property owners in the rapidly gentrifying district, filed formal objections citing concerns about decreased property values, increased foot traffic, and incompatible use patterns should homeless services be introduced to the area. Their attorney, Vivian Caldwell, possessed both political connections and a reputation for aggressive obstruction of development projects that didn't align with her client's interests. They're going to fight us at every turn, Emma warned, as she and Thomas reviewed the association's 20-page objection document one evening. The twins and Lily played a board game nearby, their cheerful arguments over rules providing counterpoint to the adults' more serious discussion. These aren't just procedural objections. They're trying to kill the project entirely. Thomas studied a particular paragraph, his expression hardening. Listen to this. The proposed facility would attract an undesirable element to an emerging luxury district, threatening both commercial viability and resident safety. Undesirable element. They're talking about families like yours 6 months ago. Emma's jaw tightened, anger flaring at the dismissive categorization of people whose circumstances she understood intimately. People don't choose homelessness. They fall into it through job loss, medical bankruptcies, domestic violence, mental health crises, all situations that could happen to anyone. We need to humanize this, Thomas said slowly, an idea forming. Not just argue the technical points, but show the human impact. Make them see the people they're dismissing as an undesirable element. That conversation planted the seed for what would become a pivotal strategy. Rather than engaging solely through lawyers and procedural channels, Emma and Thomas began organizing community events, informal gatherings where neighborhood residents could meet families who had experienced homelessness, healthcare providers who served them, and employers who had hired people transitioning from shelters to stability. The first such event attracted only a handful of curious neighbors, most arriving with evident skepticism. Among them was Marcus Chen, owner of 3 upscale restaurants in the district and vocal opponent of the project. He stood apart from the others, arms crossed defensively as Emma approached. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Chen." Emma extended her hand without expectation, unsurprised when he merely nodded in response. "I understand you have concerns about our proposal." "My newest restaurant represents a $5 million investment," Chen responded without preamble. "I've built my business on providing luxury dining experiences. How can that coexist with homeless services next door?" Emma might once have retreated from such direct confrontation. Now, strengthened by months of advocating for her patients, she met his gaze steadily. The families we aim to serve aren't defined by their temporary circumstance, but by their potential. They include nurses who lost jobs when hospitals closed, teachers displaced by rising rents, veterans struggling with PTSD, people who, with proper support, contribute tremendously to their communities. Chen's expression remained skeptical, but he accepted Emma's invitation to meet Dr. Franklin Winters, the elderly physician from the warehouse, who now volunteered with Emma's mobile unit. The former surgeon's eloquence and obvious expertise gradually softened Chen's rigid posture, opening a conversation that continued long after other attendees had departed. Similar encounters occurred at subsequent events, each creating small cracks in the opposition's unified front. Thomas proved particularly effective with skeptical business owners, his practical knowledge of building systems and maintenance addressing concrete concerns about the facility's impact on neighboring properties. Emma excelled at connecting with community members, her medical background lending credibility to discussions about public health and safety. Their most potent advocates, however, proved to be the children. Lily, Lucas, and his sister had absorbed the adults' passion for the project, creating colorful drawings of the proposed center and explaining its purpose to anyone who would listen. Their uncomplicated enthusiasm cut through political positioning and economic arguments, reminding everyone of the project's fundamental purpose, creating safety and opportunity for vulnerable families. As summer faded into autumn, unexpected progress emerged. Several business owners, including Marcus Chen, withdrew their objections to the zoning variance. The neighborhood council, initially hostile to the proposal, voted to hold a public hearing rather than issuing an immediate rejection. Small victories accumulated, though the project still faced formidable obstacles. The most significant breakthrough came during a community forum organized by the city council. Emma arranged for several formerly homeless families to share their stories, including a nurse who had lost her home after a severe illness depleted her savings, and a carpenter whose family had lived in their car for 3 months following a workplace injury. Their accounts humanized statistics, transforming abstract homeless people into individuals with talents, aspirations, and dignity. When the zoning board finally approved the necessary variance in late October, the project cleared its first major hurdle. Construction permits followed in November, allowing preliminary work to begin just as winter's chill returned to Boston. The warehouse's partial collapse during the previous winter necessitated substantial structural reinforcement before interior renovation could commence, adding complexity and cost to an already challenging timeline. Through these professional developments, Thomas and Emma's personal relationship continued its careful evolution. Weekend outings with the children became regular occurrences, followed increasingly by quieter evenings after the kids were asleep, conversations over cups of tea that stretched until midnight, discussions that ranged from childhood memories to philosophical questions about purpose and meaning. Physical boundaries dissolved gradually, casual touches becoming lingering ones, a brief hug of celebration following the zoning approval, lingering longer than strictly necessary. Neither rushed this progression, both carrying wounds that counseled caution. Thomas still maintained Sarah's memory as a presence in his home, her photograph on the mantle, her influence evident in how he raised Lily. Emma guarded her independence fiercely, determined never again to depend entirely on another person for her security or her children's well-being. Yet something undeniable grew between them, a connection founded on mutual respect rather than mere attraction, on shared values rather than convenience. The children observed in this development were, with varying degrees of comprehension, Lily asking increasingly direct questions about whether Emma might someday live with them, the twins simply incorporating Thomas into their definition of family without requiring formal explanation. This delicate balance faced its first significant test when Carla Reed, Thomas's mother, arrived for an extended Thanksgiving visit. Her initial skepticism about Emma had softened somewhat through phone conversations, but meeting in person revealed lingering reservations. The older woman watched Emma's interactions with Lily particularly closely, her expression unreadable as the girl excitedly showed Emma her latest school project. "She looks more like her mother every day," Carla observed during a rare moment alone with Thomas, her gaze following Lily as she helped the twins set the table for Thanksgiving dinner. "Sarah would be proud of how you've raised her." Thomas recognized the opening for what it was, his mother's oblique way of reminding him of Sarah's continuing importance. She would, And I think she'd approve of the people in Lily's life now, too. Carla arranged silverware with precise movements, avoiding his eyes. Emma seems competent. The children are certainly fond of her. I'm fond of her too, Mom. Thomas kept his voice level, the simple statement conveying depths he wasn't yet ready to articulate fully. She's extraordinary, professionally and personally. What she's accomplished since Christmas, how she's rebuilt her life from nothing, and how much of that rebuilding happened because of you? Carla's question emerged sharper than perhaps intended. Thomas, I worry about the foundation of this, whatever it is between you. Gratitude can masquerade as deeper feelings, especially when children are involved. The observation struck uncomfortably close to questions Thomas himself had examined during sleepless nights. Was Emma's evident affection genuine, or an extension of her gratitude? Would she have chosen his company if their introduction had occurred under different circumstances? He had no simple answer, only the accumulated evidence of months spent building something that felt increasingly authentic. Mama doesn't need me anymore, Mom. She has her career, her apartment, her independence. She chooses to spend time with me and Lily because she wants to, not because she needs to. Thomas met his mother's skeptical gaze directly. And I choose her for exactly who she is, not because I need to be needed. The conversation might have continued, but Emma entered the kitchen then, carrying a casserole dish the twins had helped prepare. The moment passed, though Thomas noticed his mother watching Emma with renewed attention throughout the evening, as if reassessing her initial judgments. Thanksgiving dinner unfolded with the controlled chaos typical of gatherings involving three excited children. Emma had prepared traditional dishes alongside specialties the twins particularly enjoyed. Thomas contributed his late wife's cranberry relish, made from a recipe Carla had taught Sarah years earlier. The symbolic significance of including this connection to the past while creating new traditions wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Later that evening, after the children had fallen asleep in a collective heap on the living room floor during a holiday movie, Carla approached Emma with an old photo album. "Thomas tells me you're a collector of stories," she said, her tone warmer than it had been previously. "I thought you might like to see some of Sarah's, for Lily's sake, of course, so you understand the foundation that came before." The gesture represented a tentative olive branch, not full acceptance, but acknowledgement of Emma's growing importance in her sons' and granddaughters' lives. Emma accepted the album with appropriate solemnity, recognizing both the trust it represented and the boundaries it subtly reinforced. As the two women paged through photographs of Sarah's life, Thomas observed from across the room, hope and apprehension mingling as the past and potential future converged in this quiet exchange. December brought new challenges to the project. Excavation for the foundation reinforcement uncovered contaminated soil requiring specialized remediation, an unexpected expense not fully covered by the project's contingency budget. Simultaneously, one of the major financial backers Harrington had secured announced they were reconsidering their commitment, citing concerns about the project's expanded scope and timeline. These developments coincided with a particularly virulent flu strain sweeping through Boston, overwhelming hospital emergency departments and spreading rapidly through schools. Lily fell ill first, her typically robust energy replaced by feverish lethargy that alarmed Thomas deeply. Emma provided professional reassurance alongside practical assistance, helping monitor symptoms and ensure proper hydration during the worst days. Just as Lily began recovering, both twins succumbed to the virus. Emma found herself dividing attention between increasingly demanding project responsibilities and caring for sick children, her professional composure occasionally cracking under the combined pressure. Thomas stepped in whenever possible, taking time away from construction site supervision to deliver children's medicine or prepare simple meals that tempted fever-suppressed appetites. The final weeks before Christmas brought escalating stress on multiple fronts. Construction delays mounted as winter weather complicated exterior work. The wavering financial backer formally withdrew their commitment, creating a significant funding gap with no obvious replacement. Harrington remained outwardly confident but scheduled increasingly frequent progress reviews, his questions growing more pointed with each meeting. Emma's mobile medical unit faced its own crisis when budget constraints threatened to reduce service frequency just as winter needs intensified. She worked punishing hours trying to maintain both regular operations and project development, returning home each night exhausted only to face domestic responsibilities that couldn't be postponed. Thomas similarly stretched himself between contracting jobs that paid immediate bills and the warehouse project that represented future stability. The physical toll showed in new lines around his eyes, in the way his shoulders remained tense even during rare moments of relaxation. On December 23rd, precisely 1 year after their first encounter outside Peterson's bakery, multiple situations reached critical mass simultaneously. The final financial projections for the warehouse project revealed a $2.4 million shortfall, even with aggressive value engineering. Without immediate replacement funding, construction would halt after the new year, potentially jeopardizing the entire initiative. This devastating news arrived via email during a meeting where Emma was already defending the medical program's budget from proposed cuts. She read the message on her phone beneath the conference table, maintaining her professional presentation while absorbing the potential collapse of everything they'd worked toward. Midway through her carefully prepared response to the budget committee, Emma's phone vibrated with an incoming call from Thomas. She diverted it to voicemail, continuing her presentation without visible interruption. When the phone immediately rang again, then a third time in rapid succession, anxiety flared. Thomas knew her schedule and would never interrupt so persistently without serious cause. Emma excused herself momentarily, stepping into the hallway to return his call. Thomas's voice came through tight with controlled panic. Lily's fever spiked to 104. She's disoriented and complaining about her neck hurting. I'm taking her to the emergency room now. The symptoms registered immediately in Emma's medical training. Potential meningitis, requiring immediate treatment. I'll meet you there. Don't wait for me to start the intake process. She ended the call, mind already calculating which hospital would be least impacted by the current flu surge, which emergency department physicians she knew personally who might expedite assessment. Emma returned to the conference room long enough to apologize for the interruption and request a postponement of the remaining agenda items. Family medical emergency, she explained briefly, professional demeanor intact despite the fear coursing through her. I need to leave immediately. Boston Children's Hospital emergency department overflowed with patients, harried staff navigating between examination rooms with the controlled urgency of battlefield medicine. Emma found Thomas in the triage area, Lily limp in his arms, her normally animated face flushed with fever and distress. A quick exchange with the charge nurse, identification of herself as a medical professional, concise description of concerning symptoms, accelerated their progress through initial assessment. The attending physician, a young woman with shadowed eyes suggesting days without adequate rest, examined Lily carefully. We need a lumbar puncture to confirm or rule out meningitis, she explained, her direct gaze softening slightly at Thomas's visible alarm. The symptoms are concerning but could also indicate severe influenza with secondary complications. We won't know without the spinal fluid analysis. Thomas looked to Emma, silent question in his eyes. Was this necessary? Was the doctor being appropriately cautious or overreacting? Emma nodded almost imperceptibly, confirming the medical recommendation while moving closer to provide tacit support. Her professional knowledge and personal investment converged in this moment, making her both participant and observer in the unfolding crisis. The procedure required Thomas to hold Lily still while a needle was inserted between vertebrae in her lower back, a difficult experience for any parent, especially one already exhausted from days of caring for a sick child. Emma remained beside him throughout, her presence steady even as her own fear for Lily bubbled beneath her professional exterior. Hours passed in the liminal space of the emergency department, tests ordered, specialists consulted, Lily drifting between restless sleep and confused wakefulness. Thomas never left her side, his focus narrowed to the immediate needs of his daughter, larger concerns temporarily suspended. Emma moved between Lily's bedside and necessary communication with the twins' caregiver, a neighbor watching them during this emergency. Shortly before midnight, the neurologist returned with results, her expression providing relief before her words confirmed it. Not meningitis, severe influenza with dehydration and secondary ear infection that's causing the neck pain. We'll admit her overnight for IV fluids and antibiotics, but she should recover completely. The diagnosis, while serious, represented the best possible outcome under the circumstances. Thomas slumped against the wall, tension draining from his body so rapidly He seemed to lose structural integrity momentarily. Emma steadied him with a hand on his arm, her own relief manifesting as unexpected tears that she quickly blinked away. "You'll stay with her tonight?" Emma asked, though the question was largely rhetorical. Nothing would remove Thomas from his daughter's side. "Yes." Thomas glanced toward his phone, sudden memory flickering across his features. "The project funding, wasn't today the deadline for—" "Don't worry about that now." Emma squeezed his arm gently. "Lily's what matters. I'll handle the rest." Once Lily was settled in a pediatric room, Emma stepped into the hallway to make necessary calls. First to Mrs. Patel, confirming the twins could stay overnight if needed. Then to Harrington, explaining the situation with Lily and requesting a brief extension on the funding deadline. His response surprised her, not just ready agreement, but genuine concern for Lily's condition and Thomas's well-being. The deadline was somewhat arbitrary, Harrington admitted, his voice carrying clearly through the hospital's quiet corridor. "We can extend it until after the holiday. But Emma, you should know, I've been approached by developers interested in the property for luxury conversion. If we can't secure replacement funding by mid-January, the foundation board may reconsider the entire project." The information landed like a physical blow, compounding the day's emotional toll. Emma leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of her own exhaustion, the accumulated stress of project challenges, children's illnesses, and now Lily's hospitalization creating a weight that threatened to overwhelm her customary resilience. "I understand," she managed, professionalism providing script when her own words failed. "Thank you for the extension. I'll be in touch after Christmas." Emma returned to Lily's room, finding Thomas in the vinyl recliner beside the bed, his hand covering his sleeping daughter's smaller one. The scene crystallized something Emma had observed countless times in hospital settings: the fierce protectiveness of a parent, the vulnerability of the child, the fragile miracle of their connection. She had witnessed similar tableaus professionally for years, but experiencing it now with people who had become essential to her own life carried different significance entirely. Thomas looked up as she entered, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Thank you for being here, for knowing what to do, who to talk to." Emma settled into the molded plastic chair opposite him, their positions flanking Lily's bed, creating a protective triangle. "Of course I'm here. Where else would I be?" The simplicity of the question contained multitudes, acknowledgement of their intertwined lives, confirmation of priorities, promise of continued presence. Thomas held her gaze across the sleeping child between them, something shifting in his expression. Realization or decision, Emma couldn't determine which. "I've been thinking about what happens after," he said softly, voice pitched not to disturb Lily. "After the project is finished, after the center opens, after all the immediate goals are achieved." Emma nodded, unsure where his thoughts were leading but willing to follow. "That's still more than a year away, assuming we find the replacement funding." "We'll find it." The certainty in Thomas's voice surprised her, given the day's discouraging news. "But that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm talking about us, you, me, the kids. What we're building together alongside the center." Emma's heart quickened, caution and hope warring within her chest. They had carefully avoided defining their relationship, allowing it to evolve organically without premature labels or expectations. Now, in this sterile hospital room with Lily sleeping between them, Thomas seemed prepared to name what had been developing since Christmas Eve a year earlier. "I know the timing is terrible," Thomas continued when Emma didn't immediately respond, "with Lily sick and the project in jeopardy and everything else happening. But watching you today, how you balanced professional expertise with personal care, how you knew exactly what Lily needed, what I needed, it crystallized something I've felt for months." Emma found herself holding her breath, suspended between fear and anticipation. "What did it crystallize?" "That I love you." Thomas spoke the words simply, without dramatic emphasis or qualification. "Not because you saved Lily last year, or because you're amazing with the twins, or because we work well together on the project. Those are all true, but they're consequences, not causes. I love you for who you are, your integrity, your resilience, your capacity for joy despite everything you have experienced." The declaration hung between them, honest and unadorned. Emma felt tears threatening again, emotion overwhelming the careful boundaries she'd maintained since their relationship began evolving beyond friendship. Thomas, the moment fractured as Lily stirred, whimpering slightly before settling again. By silent agreement, they postponed the conversation, attending to her immediate needs, adjusting blankets, checking temperature, offering small sips of water. By the time she drifted back to deeper sleep, the hospital corridor outside had grown quieter, night shift routines replacing daytime bustle. Emma rose, stretching muscles stiffened from hours in the uncomfortable chair. I should check on the twins, let Mrs. Patel know what's happening. The practical statement masked her need for emotional space. Time to process Thomas's declaration and formulate her own response. Thomas nodded, understanding evident in his eyes. Of course, will you come back afterward? Yes. Emma gathered her coat and bag, pausing at the door to look back at father and daughter. Thomas's protective posture, Lily's small hand still clasped in his larger one. I'll always come back. The simple promise contained her answer, though neither acknowledged it explicitly. Some truths required proper moments for formal declaration, and this hospital room, with its antiseptic scent and mechanical hums, wasn't the right setting for completing what Thomas had begun. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, sunlight glinting off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Lily's condition improved dramatically with treatment, her fever reducing and alertness returning. By mid-morning, the attending physician confirmed she could be discharged, with instructions for continued antibiotics and careful monitoring at home. Thomas called Emma with the good news while signing a release paperwork. They're letting us go. Could you meet us at the apartment? I don't want her in the cold any longer than necessary. Already on my way, Emma's voice carried smiles through the connection. The twins made welcome home cards, and Mrs. Patel sent chicken soup that could probably cure anything medical science hasn't already addressed. The small gathering at Thomas's apartment bore little resemblance to traditional Christmas Eve celebrations. Lily reclined on the sofa, still pale but significantly improved, while the twins carefully arranged their handmade cards around her like offerings at a shrine. Mrs. Patel bustled between kitchen and living room, dispensing soup and unsolicited but generally accurate medical advice. Thomas moved through these activities with the particular relief of a parent whose child has narrowly avoided serious illness, gratitude making each mundane interaction precious. Emma arrived last, arms laden with medications from the hospital pharmacy and a small Christmas tree she'd impulsively purchased from a sidewalk vendor. I thought, since we'll all be here tonight instead of at the community dinner. She trailed off, suddenly uncertain whether she'd overstepped. Thomas relieved her of the tree, his smile dispelling any doubt. It's perfect. Exactly what we needed. The afternoon unfolded in gentle domesticity, simple meals prepared and shared, modest gifts wrapped while recipients pretended not to notice, impromptu carols sung with more enthusiasm than accuracy. No mention was made of the project's funding crisis or Thomas's declaration in the hospital room. By unspoken agreement, these matters would wait until after Christmas, allowing this brief interlude of peace amidst ongoing challenges. As evening approached, Lily's energy began flagging, prompting Thomas to suggest an early bedtime. The twins protested initially, concerned about Santa's potential arrival timing, but eventually succumbed to Emma's assurance that presents would await them regardless of when they fell asleep. Once all three children were settled in Lily's room, the twins on air mattresses beside her bed, the adults retreated to the living room, Christmas tree lights casting colored shadows across walls and furniture. Emma sank onto the sofa, the day's accumulated fatigue finally asserting itself now that immediate responsibilities had been addressed. Thomas joined her after checking once more on the sleeping children, his movement bringing him closer than strictly necessary, though not quite touching. About last night, he began, picking up the conversation that had been interrupted in Lily's hospital room. I meant what I said, but the timing was admittedly terrible. Hospitals tend to heighten emotions, make everything seem more urgent. Emma turned toward him, studying his face in the multicolored glow from the tree. Are you taking it back? No. Thomas's response came immediately, certainty evident in both word and expression. I'm just giving you an opportunity to pretend you didn't hear it, if that would be easier. Emma smiled, the gesture softening features tightened by stress and insufficient sleep. When have I ever taken the easier path, Thomas? If I had, I wouldn't have fought the insurance company for you and Lily. I wouldn't have stood up to hospital administration. I certainly wouldn't have agreed to this impossible project with its endless obstacles and moving targets. All fair points. Thomas's answering smile held equal parts humor and affection. So what path are you taking now? Emma shifted closer, eliminating the careful space between them. The one that terrifies and exhilarates me in equal measure. The one that leads toward you, not away. Her voice softened, vulnerability replacing professional composure. I love you too, Thomas. Not from gratitude or convenience or any external factor. Because of who you are, your integrity, your gentleness, your capacity for joy despite everything you've experienced. The deliberate echo of his words from the hospital wrapped around them both, creating connection that transcended physical touch. Thomas reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers in the gesture that had become their particular language. Where do we go from here? Forward. Emma's response emerged with surprising certainty. Together, figuring it out as we go, the way we've done with everything else. Thomas nodded, acceptance and agreement in the simple movement. One step at a time, but not alone. Emma completed the thought, their shared understanding requiring no elaborate declarations. On Christmas morning, Emma woke early, tiptoeing past sleeping children to prepare coffee in Thomas's kitchen. She found him already there, measuring grounds into the filter with practiced movements. They exchanged quiet greetings, morning routines merging seamlessly after months of gradual integration. Thomas handed her a steaming mug, their fingers brushing in the exchange. I have something for you, a Christmas gift that couldn't wait for the children to wake up. Emma accepted both coffee and statement with raised eyebrows. Curiosity piqued. That sounds either very thoughtful or potentially inappropriate for young audiences. Thomas laughed softly, the sound warming the kitchen more effectively than the heating system. Definitely the former. He reached into his pocket, extracting a small silver object that caught the early morning light. His father's pocket watch. The family heirloom Emma had seen him consult on particularly stressful days. Thomas, I can't accept that. It's your heritage, your connection to your father. Emma set her coffee down, hands remaining deliberately at her sides rather than reaching for the offered timepiece. That's exactly why I want you to have it. Thomas held the watch between them, its polished surface reflecting miniature versions of their faces. Time is the most valuable gift we can give each other. My father understood that. It's why he carried this watch, why he checked it so often. Not from impatience, but from awareness of time's preciousness. Emma hesitated, the gesture's significance simultaneously touching and overwhelming. Are you sure? I've never been more certain of anything. Thomas placed the watch gently in her palm, closing her fingers around its solid weight. The past matters. My father, Sarah, your journey to this moment. But this isn't about looking backward. It's about the time we have now, the future we're building together. Emma studied the watch resting in her hand, its mechanical precision representing continuity across generations. Without speaking, she removed the nursing badge she still carried in her pocket, the one she'd left for Thomas that first Christmas morning, and placed it on the counter beside the watch. For the man who proved that the best medicine is kindness, she quoted softly, echoing the words she'd written a year earlier. I left this for you then because it represented everything I valued but couldn't keep. Now I'm giving it to you properly, not as a goodbye, but as a promise. Thomas picked up the badge, recognition of the symbolic exchange evident in his expression. Before he could respond, excited footsteps announced the children's awakening, their Christmas morning enthusiasm temporarily suspending the intimate moment between adults. Emma tucked the watch carefully into her pocket, while Thomas did the same with the nursing badge, each accepting the other's gift as tangible representation of less visible exchange. The day unfolded in joyful calm, presents unwrapped, meals shared, traditions both honored and newly created. By unspoken agreement, Emma and Thomas maintained their customary interactions in front of the children, neither hiding nor emphasizing the shift in their relationship. There would be time later for discussions about integration of households, explanations to children, planning for practical arrangements. Today allowed for simpler pleasure. Being together, watching three children bond across biological boundaries, creating memory anchors for future reference. Late that evening, after the twins had fallen asleep in Lily's room and quiet settled over the apartment, Thomas discovered Emma on the small balcony, watching snow begin falling again over Boston's illuminated skyline. He joined her in the cold, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. "I've been thinking about the project funding," Emma said after comfortable silence had stretched between them. "What if we organize a community investment initiative instead of relying on traditional donors? Small contributions from local businesses, residents, former patients, people with direct interest in the center's success." Thomas considered the proposal, practical considerations automatically engaging. "We'd need hundreds of smaller investors to replace the missing millions. The administrative complexity alone would be daunting. But the community ownership would be worth it," Emma countered, excitement warming her voice despite the frigid air. "People invest differently when they have personal stake in an outcome. The Harbor Business Association members who've come around to supporting us, what if they became actual stakeholders rather than just withdrawn opponents?" The concept took root as they discussed possibilities, initial skepticism yielding to growing enthusiasm. By the time Cole drove them back inside, preliminary structure had formed around Emma's inspiration, a tiered investment approach combining microfunding from community members with targeted appeals to businesses directly benefiting from neighborhood stabilization. Thomas closed the balcony door against winter's chill, turning to find Emma illuminated by Christmas tree lights, snowflakes melting in her hair from their time outside. The moment crystallized for him, this extraordinary woman who had entered his life through seeming chance, whose determination had transformed not just her own circumstances, but the community around her, whose love now offered him second chance at partnership he'd thought forever lost. "What?" Emma asked, noticing his prolonged gaze. "I was just thinking that a year ago tonight you were standing outside Peterson's bakery in the snow, and I was walking home from an emergency repair job." Thomas moved closer, reaching to brush melting snowflakes from her hair. "All the thousand little choices that had to align for us to meet in that exact moment. My taking that job, you're going to that specific bakery, both of us being exactly who we needed to be to recognize something worth preserving in each other." Emma leaned into his touch, her expression softening. "I don't believe in fate or predestined meetings, but I do believe in recognizing opportunity when it appears, in stopping when others walk past, in offering help when it's needed, in accepting it when it's offered. In fixing what's broken," Thomas added, echoing the words painted on his work truck. "In healing what's wounded," Emma completed, their professional metaphors converging as their lives had done. Outside, snow continued falling over Boston, covering the city in fresh possibility. Inside, warmth gathered between two people who had found each other at their lowest moments and built connection that transcended circumstance. A family created through choice rather than obligation, strengthened through shared purpose, sustained by love that had emerged not despite hardship, but because of it. The journey ahead held challenges: project funding still uncertain, living arrangements to be determined, children's adjustments to manage. But these concerns remained outside this moment's periphery. Tomorrow's problems deferred by tonight's certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together, each stronger for the other's presence, all of them bound by threads woven through chance encounter into deliberate connection. Emma reached for Thomas's hand, the gesture now familiar, yet never routine. "Merry Christmas, Thomas Reed." "Merry Christmas, Emma Collins." His fingers interlaced with hers, completing the circuit. "Welcome home,